Right. Well, it's just 1 minute after 10, and we have, looks like 16 folks joined at this point. So for the sake of everyone's time, I think we should get started with this webinar about the call for proposals that the Morpho initiative has recently launched. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your interest in this program and in learning more about it here at this webinar. So just to show you the plan for today's agenda, it's going to be pretty quick to get through the first 4 sections so that we can focus the majority of our time on your all's questions. So hopefully you have some questions that will help clarify your interest in Morpho. So we'll start with a brief background about Morpho and what our plan is with it. We'll go into a little description about what NCEAS working groups and trainings have historically been like and how they'll be applied in this Morpho initiative. A little bit of a description of our RFP process and timeline, and some reminders about how you can get updates about Morpho as we proceed over these next weeks and months. So I am Jeff Willard. I am an NCEAS program officer and support a lot of the research coordination of NCEAS working groups and have been for a number of years. And I will be kind of the lead point of contact for funded Morpho projects as far as supporting their day-to-day needs and logistics. And Courtney?
Hi, I'm Courtney Scarborough. I'm the Deputy Director here at NCEAS, and I'll be supporting Jeff and the rest of our team here as we launch this Morpho process. I'll also be the moderator here today for this webinar. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that we're all muted because this is the webinar format. So throughout this whole process, you can enter your questions into the chat or the Q&A, whichever you prefer. And then at the end, we'll go through all those questions. So as they come to you, please pop them in there. And then at the end, we'll also have an open opportunity to ask more questions. So we appreciate you all being here and look forward to discussing this new initiative with you.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. And also, we are recording this and we will be throwing up the video onto YouTube after this webinar completes. So if you end up wanting to share this with any colleagues or others, we'll be able to share the link with folks on Twitter, and it'll be posted on our main Morpho webpage on the NCEAS website. So very kind of general background on Morpho here. I'm sure if you all have been exposed to the RFP materials, then you'll already know all this stuff, but we just want to make sure everybody is on the same page as we dive in. So Morpho funds and convenes teams of government agency, NGO, tribal, and academic researchers to develop and accelerate science for environmental management. Teams are enhanced by trainings in data science and management skills that are necessary for environmental management and conservation professionals. And in that way, Morpho advances workforce skills while developing science to tackle pressing issues facing our changing planet.
Morpho, this first call for proposals, which just launched, will fund 2 to 3 working groups at $75,000 to $150,000 over 2 years. And teams are made up of 12 to 15 individual experts. And that's kind of optimum number for a working group process that we've found throughout the years here at NCEAS, that really this is kind of the sweet spot where we get enough ideas in the room, but not so many people that there's sort of, not a team atmosphere. And team members, for one unique thing about this Morpho initiative is that all team members in the working group can participate in 2 to 3 trainings that are tailored to the project needs. So we will work with you to determine sort of what the team needs are and when those are most necessary. And we can offer trainings throughout the process to help really accelerate the science. And this is going to be an annual call. So we're really excited that this is going to be one of many moving forward. So we're looking forward to having this new initiative launched this year and then just kind of increasing the amount of groups we're able to fund every year.
Yes, thank you, Courtney. So a little bit of background on the NCEAS working group model and process, if you aren't already familiar with it. So NCEAS has been around for 27 years. It was founded in 1995, and the working group model that it helped innovate has been a staple of NCEAS activities in that entire time. So You know, the kind of format of working groups that Courtney just described applies, has applied, you know, in that entire time, and will proceed through the Morpho program. And so depending on the question being asked, the specific research question being asked by a particular working group, that working group can include experts in ecology, environmental science, data science, indigenous knowledge, sociology, economics, political science. It can include local decision makers or stakeholders, et cetera. So it really can include a really wide variety of folks who might have something interesting to share about the research question, some unique perspective to share that will help produce the research, as well as also potentially inform decision making around that. And of course, that can include all sectors: government, academia, NGO, private sector, tribal, indigenous groups, and others. So these groups do not collect new data. They meet at NCEAS in order to synthesize existing data sets, expose those data sets to novel analyses, and also make novel discoveries through that work that couldn't be done by a single lab or organization. So that's what makes working groups really unique compared to just kind of your traditional research approaches that are in place. And NCEAS lowers the activation energy that all of this requires by providing working groups with logistical support, computing capability, support in the management of complex data sets and databases, advice about informatics and sharing of expertise about informatics, and then also guidance on team management and team science and the leadership of synthesis teams. So all those things are provided to funded working groups. And all of those components have been an essential element of NCEAS' success over the years, over the last 27 years. So in that time, NCEAS and other similar synthesis centers have been studied by sociologists who have been interested in the working group model. And this independent research has shown that compared to independent scientists or remote research collaboration teams, that these in-person working group teams that come together in neutral meeting spaces like NCEAS provides, they tend to gain a higher level of trust within the group, more kind of internal commitment to the project, and also great creativity. These teams generate ideas faster and do peer review of those ideas on the fly. And then they also have a higher publication productivity rate, which is awesome. So, and then also many of the individuals who participate on these teams are then more likely to build productive partnerships throughout their whole careers. And so those are all research outcomes that have come from sociologists who have studied the working group model here at NCEAS and other centers. So this figure here is a kind of a general overview of what the timeline of a 2-year-long working group project might look like. So here on the left side and in blue, we kind of have the stage that many of you may be in as far as the kind of conception of the projects and the development of the research questions and ideas, and the consideration of who the best team members to join the team may be. So that's the whole collaboration planning phase and consideration of the team, and also, you know, early part of the data assembly stage. When we get to the green section of this figure, that's where we're looking at the actual working group meetings taking place, the in-person meetings at NCEAS. And so we have, you know, each project will kick off with its first working group meeting. And that's where data assembly phase starts transitioning to the data integration phase. And then in between meetings, in white here, we have more virtual collaboration occurring as kind of the outcomes of a meeting will you know, transition to each member of the working group, you know, conducting work on their own and in partnership with others virtually, and then coming back together for more meetings over time and over those intervening next months. So that all wraps up, you know, from data integration through data analysis to the data preservation stage. This kind of shows the data pipeline and timeline for things before wrapping up the projects. So that in general is how NCEAS working groups work over their lifetimes.
So some of you may have participated in working groups at NCEAS or other similar programs, but one thing that is unique, I think, about Morpho and that we're really excited about is that we're going to be coupling this working group model that we've developed over the last 27 years with targeted, really useful trainings that will occur throughout the timeline of the working group. So this is something we've done informally for many years, but we really think that these trainings, that when people come in for a working group, they're not just coming in to, you know, have an opportunity just to work together on science, but they really want to come out of this process with having new skills. And we also think that not only can you come out of this process with new skills, but if you go through these trainings through the course of your working group, it can really, if we place them at the right time, it can really accelerate the work that gets done. So we're excited that we can offer trainings throughout these processes because NCEAS really has specialized in providing trainings to the ecological and environmental science community at every step of the collaborative science process. So this can exist, you know, this could be things like the fundamentals of team science to reproducible workflows, to data management and storage, data viz, science communication, facilitation of meetings. We really hope to be able to offer modules for each of these steps in the synthesis science process with the hopes of being able to meet your team where they are and where their needs lie. So we'll provide these tailored trainings to each working group, and we'll make sure that they line up where the working group needs them the most. And, you know, this isn't something where we want each working group to participate in every single training, but it's really working with you to determine where you and your team could develop new skills that would help you in your process. So these could consist of modules that's 1 to 2 hours to a full day, depending on the needs. And we'll work with you to determine kind of where those needs lie. And we'll be hiring new staff for these trainings. So we'll have a lot of capacity to be able to offer these pieces throughout the process.
Yeah, and so a reminder of our timeline. I'm sure, you know, many of you have already seen these dates, but you know, the RFP launched earlier this month and will wrap up by June 1st at 5 p.m. Pacific time. That's when all proposals will be due. If you don't think you can make it, you know, develop your proposal in time for this round, that's fine. As Courtney mentioned earlier, this will be an annual call for proposals. So if you can't do this year, you can maybe be thinking about how your proposal could be fleshed out for next year's call for proposal. So all those proposals that we do get in by June 1st will be reviewed by our Science Advisory Council in June and into July. And that, you know, in partnership with that Science Advisory Council, we'll be able to make final decisions about which projects will be funded by sometime in either late July or probably very early August. So with the idea that then once the teams are notified that have been funded, they'll be able to turn around and hopefully start, you know, sometime in the fall of 2022 in scheduling their first in-person meeting sometime around then. So a couple testimonials here about working with NCEAS and working groups that conduct synthesis science here at NCEAS. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the work of E.O. Wilson. In his book in 1998 called Conciliance, he describes from his perspective why he thinks that synthesis science is going to be so fundamental to the development of knowledge in the 21st century and beyond. And so the kind of key great quote from Conciliance is, "We are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. The world will be run by synthesizers, people able to put together the right info at the right time, think critically about it, and make important choices wisely."
And we've really found this to be true throughout the history of time at NCEAS. So, you know, NCEAS has been a really supportive place for a lot of the ecological community. And it's in here you can see from Priyanka, this has really helped set the stage for her career and for many careers that have come out of the last 27 years here. And Skylar has also said, "It's amazing how much I've learned in the few months of collaborating with top scientists. The NCEAS model of working groups and synthesis science really does accelerate scientific process." So I think, you know, coming in, if you've never participated in a working group, Skylar came in as a postdoc, participated in her first working group. And, you know, I think even after your first meeting, you really see what bringing people together in one room for intensive time together can really do to accelerate ideas and accelerate that process of science. And it's not just sort of those formal sessions where you're in the room at NCEAS, you know, working on data or working on ideas. It's also the in-between times when you're at the water cooler or you're going to a happy hour or a dinner together, when you can really kind of like chew on the ideas, and those ideas sort of start to develop in those in-between times. And it's a really great opportunity to be here in Santa Barbara, be together. And I think that's sort of where the magic happens at NCEAS. And so we've had a lot of experience with people, and we have a lot of testimonials that say, you know, this working group model really works and is really unique for accelerating and developing science.
Yeah, and on that note, you know, it's one of the major impacts, of course, that NCEAS has had in the last couple of years with COVID, is that we've been unable to do a lot of in-person meetings, which has been our bread and butter, and which is where we really think the magic happens, as Courtney described it. And so we're very excited now that we've kind of started coming out of our pandemic, that the work that NCEAS is getting back to normal, and we're having a lot of in-person working groups occurring now, and in these last few months. It's been great to be back, and we're excited to be able to be hosting Morpho teams in person soon. So. As a reminder of ways that you can continue to keep abreast of updates from the Morpho side of things, of course, you can check out the Morpho webpage, which is also linked within the RFP materials that I'm sure many of you have seen. And if you're not already following the NCEAS Twitter feed, please feel free to join there. We're going to be sharing a lot of news about Morpho over the next weeks and months there. And then also, if you go to the NCEAS webpage, on the bottom of our homepage, you can find the button for subscribe, and there you can subscribe to the NCEAS newsletter, which comes out on a monthly basis. And there's a lot of really cool in-depth news about general NCEAS activities, and of course, Morpho activities there as well. So those are, I think, the three best ways to kind of keep abreast of what's going on with Morpho. So at this point, we want to stop and open things up to questions that you all may have about the Morpho RFP process and proposal development stage, or anything about that we've talked about today. So yeah, send in your questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to each of them. So Courtney.
Yes, thanks everybody. So first question, Jeff, is are trainings likely to happen during in-person meetings? And then do we need to identify possible training needs in the proposal, or can that be part of the grant period process?
So I'll take the second part first. You can, if you already have a sense of what trainings you think would be most relevant to your work and most useful, then certainly include those in your proposal idea, but you don't need to. You don't have to flesh any of that out quite yet. We can work with you, with each funded team, to determine what the best trainings would be. As far as whether they can occur during working group meetings, that's definitely possible, though it's not required. So the idea is that some trainings may be able to be provided virtually, in between working group meetings. But if there's a way to work it out logistically, where maybe the working group comes to NCEAS a day early or stays a day late, and can in that way participate in an in-person training tacked on to the beginning or end of their working group meeting, that's another option. Although it doesn't need to work out that way. We've developed the whole training module series to be able to do those virtually for folks. And then also, the trainings it's not necessary that every individual in a working group participates in each training that's provided to the working group. It could be really based on the specific individuals of the team and what they're most interested in, and what would be most helpful for their work within the context of the team.
Yeah, I would just echo, we really want these trainings to be useful for people and opportunities to learn. They're not something that's required or something that should feel onerous. So
that's right.
We really want them to be useful. And over the course of COVID, we've gotten really good at virtual training. So that is something we're more confident in now than ever. So, if time permitting, asynchronous, not asynchronous, but not in person and not during working group meetings, if trainings, happen a month after, a month before, or 2 months in the interim, just when they're most useful for the people that they're most useful for.
That's right.
So another one related to trainings here, Jeff, is there a list of proposed trainings? It's hard for me to know what the extent or scope of these are.
Yeah, so if you check out the NC's website and see the Learning Hub, you'll be able to get a sense there of what the various trainings that are provided by our NC's Learning Hub are. Those are in continuous development. The Learning Hub is a somewhat new kind of primary pillar of NC's activities, and so we're constantly developing new training materials and new trainings that are being updated on that web page. So that's going to be a dynamic web page, and so if you kind of keep checking that out over time, you'll see more and more things added there. But that would be the best way to find out about trainings that you could participate in. And I think, as the Learning Hub is developing, we're also very open to ideas from our working groups as far as what trainings they need. And so we can work with teams to even develop new trainings depending on what those needs are, and add them to our Learning Hub library. Courtney, do you have more to add to that?
No, that sounds good. I guess just that we are hiring new staff members to be able to support this program. So we are also bringing in new skills for training opportunities. So we have a really robust group of training curriculum and materials that we currently use, but we're also hoping that we will, as Jeff mentioned, be able to develop some new modules and new trainings to really help support Morpho specifically. Okay, so how about some questions about participants? So first one is, for the proposal, should we identify the 12 to 15 participants that we expect to participate? And do those 12 to 15 participants need to be the same for every meeting?
Yes, great question. So you'll see within the application materials, there's a participant table that should be completed as a part of your proposal. And so that should include 12 to 15 individuals who you think would be great to serve on the team. And not everyone needs to be confirmed at this proposal stage. You'll see that everyone that's added to that table can be identified as having been invited or confirmed or still to be invited. So I would say put together that list of folks, including maybe existing colleagues that you already have and have already talked about this project with, and have already confirmed that they're interested in participating. But you could also include in that list folks who you would like to work with, or folks who who you may not yet know and may not therefore have yet invited to participate. But once you get funded, you can then kind of begin that kind of outreach process with folks. So it's not like a really strict approach to how you develop that. I would say you should have invited maybe half or so, but it doesn't need to be exactly that. And so it's pretty loose. Sorry, Courtney, what was the other part of that question?
Do the same participants need to be in every single meeting?
Yeah, so no, they do not. I think ideally it would be great if there's a core component of your team that does participate in all meetings, and then kind of maybe a secondary core that participates in most. You don't want to have a working group that is totally different at every meeting. But that said, if there are kind of like stakeholders, for example, who would be able to participate in one of the early meetings in order to help provide perspectives on what will be most useful for them as far as implementation and decision making, and then they might not necessarily need to be engaged in future meetings because the rest of the working group is kind of just working on developing the research products that the stakeholders have said would be most effective. That's an example of an individual who might not need to participate in more than one meeting, and there are others. But yeah, again, in general, I would say the majority of your team should be participating in every meeting.
And we should also highlight that for the review process, the composition of your working group will be evaluated. So the diversity of the working group is really important. And if you are struggling with identifying specific experts or people who can really fill out your team and make sure that you cover the full diversity of people that can really impact your science, you can work, reach out to us, and throughout the proposal process, we can also help to identify experts and work with you to make sure that your team is diverse enough to be able to really tackle these questions from many perspectives. Okay, so one more participant question, well, I guess a couple. Can federal scientists lead Morpho working groups?
Yes, definitely. And we certainly encourage that. We think that'll be a great way to potentially inform, federal decision-making, agency decision-making. So yeah, we certainly encourage that.
So maybe let's move on to a couple around the proposal process and the funding process. So do we receive feedback on unfunded proposals?
Yeah, we will probably be able to provide feedback to all reviewed proposals, although it might be limited to a bulleted list based on the review process with our Science Advisory Council. The council will have some feedback developed that we can share, and hopefully that will be useful in potentially adjusting the proposal for submission in future rounds of the Morpho call for proposals process. It won't be exhaustive, but it at the very least we'll be able to share a short bulleted list of feedback.
And here we have a few budget related questions for the proposal. Is the budget something that needs to go through our university, or does all the funding stay at NCEAS?
So all the funding will stay at NCEAS. Does not need to go through your university. That really helps simplify a lot of things and makes it really easy. There you'll see that there are options in some cases to propose, miscellaneous budgetary needs that might be, contracting for the work of like a graphic designer, for example, depending on the needs of the project. But even in those cases, yeah, all those funds stay with NCEAS, and we'll, work closely with each of the project PIs to kind of use and distribute those funds.
Can the grant recipient receive overhead to cover the expenses of project management?
No, unfortunately not. That's not included in the budget. So the lion's share of the budgets, as I'm sure you may have seen, go to convening the working groups in person and the travel costs associated with that. And then there are funds available for some of those miscellaneous tasks that I suggested earlier, as well as the covering of publication costs. So the research outcomes and articles that develop out of the working group are also covered, but otherwise overhead and things like that are not covered by the budgets.
And what about is funding for this program coming from federal grants? Because this might pose ethics issues for federal employees accepting those funds. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great point. So this round, absolutely not. You don't need to worry about that at all for this current call for proposals. It's possible that in the future, Morpho could be funded by a more diverse selection of grants, including from the federal government. And in that case, we'll be able to clarify within the RFP materials, again, in future years, the process there and how folks should be considering those ethical needs and guidelines. But again, for this round, you do not need to worry about anything like that. All the funds are coming from Morpho at this point.
So regarding the matching funds, can a participant's time be counted as a match? And is there a timeline over which matching funds must occur? So for example, can expenses incurred prior to the proposal count? Yeah, so I would say, yeah, if there's been some kind of significant activity and expense that has already occurred, describe that within the proposal for sure. And
there's probably a lot of gray area there, and it's hard to state, clearly one way or the other whether that would be considered truly matching funds. But we can think about that on our side after we receive your proposal. So if you think there's something relevant in that way, then I encourage you to include that in the proposal in your description of matching funds. As far as people's time goes, that I don't think that would qualify for matching funds. I mean, all working groups are made up of team members who are really devoting their time, volunteering their time for the research of the working group, and so they're all equivalent in that case. So don't bother including that as part of your matching funds.
Can funding be used to support a postdoc or research staff, or is it all for meetings?
So this first year, our call for proposals is really just covering the convening of the teams. That said, NCEAS does have a history of supporting things like research assistants and postdocs, and we do hope to be able to do that in the future. It's possible that even some of the projects funded in this round may be able to take advantage of research support, provided after funding is already figured out, and we can kind of work with teams on that. As we can cross that bridge when we come to it. As far as this, the current development of your budget proposals, there's no ability yet to add research support staff.
Thanks, Jeff. I think we'll maybe move on to some questions about the actual process of the working group and sort of ideas. Yeah. So how specific must/should the research questions be to make a competitive proposal?
Yeah, it's hard to really quantify specificity in this case. I guess I would say it's so dependent on what the challenge that's being proposed is, and how wide or how narrow the research questions are really dependent on that challenge, and and also the spatial scope of the project. I mean, if we're talking about a very small area, a locality versus a more regional scope of things, then the specificity would probably vary quite a bit depending on that. But I think in general, the more specificity, the better. And certainly, we're unlikely to fund a project that is so general or generic in scope that it doesn't have a lot of tangibility to it. We want proposals to have already a pretty clear scope of where their research is focused and what potential impacts they would be targeting are, and so therefore what the stakeholder community and decision-making community that would be most interested in the outcomes of the research are already identified. And so I don't know that helps, but again, I guess the more specificity, the better, and the more kind of tangible potential impact, then that should really help guide what your research question is. Yeah,
I think for Morpho, our sort of tagline that we've developed for this first call is collaborative data science in service of environmental management. So we really are looking for that skew towards useful science that can clearly be useful for environmental management. So as much as you can speak to the needs and the potential applications, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's well said. Thanks, Courtney.
So does Morpho have a preference for national versus global syntheses? And this is coming from someone with the perspective of a federal scientist.
We don't have a strong preference either way. We're open to all ideas and all scopes. So if there is, I mean, we want to be able to serve the local, regional, and national communities, and we're excited to receive proposals in that case. But we're also very interested in the international challenges that people may be cooking up as far as how they want to tackle those. And so, there's no preference either way. I guess again, we would just say when it comes to a kind of a global scope, we'd again, going back to the previous question, it would be great if even though it is global, to have a very clear locality in mind where potential research could inform actual on the ground decision making. So yeah.
Okay, so to what extent does NCEAS provide facilitation and guidance to make decisions about the products or analyses that will be produced? So for example, the specific research questions that will be answered.
Right. Yeah, so we provide a fair amount of support in that way. So, basically through the review process with our Science Advisory Council, we'll be able to, through that process, provide a lot of guidance for the funded projects as far as tweaks that can be made to the methodology proposed, the timeline plan, the trainings involved, et cetera. So there's a lot of touch points and support provided by myself and other members of the Morpho team here at NCEAS, and that continues throughout the project, including in preparation for each of the individual meetings and each of the trainings that will occur. During the meetings themselves, we'll be able to be very hands-on, and including with data science support provided by NCEAS and meeting coordination and facilitation stuff. So there's a lot of support given throughout, including virtual kind of meetings that we can have between Morpho staff and PIs to kind of develop the plans for each meeting and change the course of the project as necessary over the course of the 2 years.
Thanks, Jeff. So this question comes from someone who has a coalition of people brought together that are interested in compiling, studying, and advancing research related to desert carbon sequestration.
Mm-hmm.
It says, so far we've found few desert carbon sequestration experts to round out our team. Would this be a major obstacle in our application process?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it kind of depends on how many people you already have in mind and how many blank lines in your participant table there might be. I would say if you already have a few folks on your core team and a few ideas of others who might potentially be added to it, that's great. And if you need guidance from Morpho on a few others to add to the table beyond that, we can totally do that. And so we can work with each team to flesh out the composition of the working group membership. But again, it's hard to know exactly how to answer that based on the uncertainty. I mean, if you only have a very small number of folks who you already have in mind and a lot of uncertainty about who would be the majority of the team, then that might be a challenge for your proposal. But I guess I would encourage the questioner to reach out after this, and we can maybe work with you one-on-one to consider that more deeply.
Thanks, Jeff. So do we have a definition for environmental management, and what kinds of management fall into that scope, i.e. climate, wildfire, fish and wildlife, others?
Yeah, all of the above. We have a very broad definition of environmental management. And so I'd say anything that is associated with the human interaction with nature and systems, ecosystems, from biodiversity and protection all the way up to climate change mitigation and everything in between. So it's pretty loosely defined in that way.
So now let's move on to some questions about logistics. So when we say all the funding stays at NCEAS, that means participants would work directly with you for travel arrangements or get reimbursed for travel or reimbursed for publication costs?
Kind of a mix of both. You'll work very closely with the Morpho staff on travel logistics, and we'll take care of covering all the costs of purchasing flights and hotels and whatnot. And then, of course, when folks are here on site at NCEAS, folks will be going out to dinner as a team, and they'll pay individually for their dinners, but then get reimbursed for all the costs associated with meals and local travel after the fact. So some of those costs are covered by us, before travel, like again, the flights and the hotels, whereas other costs, will be covered by team members, but they'll be reimbursed for those after the fact.
Thanks, Jeff. Can you also speak a little bit more to the cyber infrastructure here at NCEAS? So are the tools open source, and are they available to be used while remote or virtually interacting?
Yeah, so I would encourage the questioner to check out the NCEAS website. If you look at the top menu of the NCEAS website under R Science and go to the section called Data Science, that will describe a lot more detail than I'll provide here about what our approach to data science research is and cyber infrastructure and support. We do, ascribe to open science principles here at NCEAS. And, we expect all of our working groups to ascribe to those policies as well. And so you can see more information there about the specifics of our data policy and support. And I would say if there's a specific question you have about that, again, you can email us at Morpho and we'll work with you one-on-one. I don't know, Courtney, do you have more you want to add to that?
Just to say, for collaboration and any of our data science needs, we do stick to open source for the most part. So everything we do offer is open source. We are using Zoom, which is one thing that is not open source, but we do offer Zoom support for working groups. And we do offer virtual collaboration support as needed. So, I think we also have Morpho staff that is able to, and NCEAS staff that is able to support these working groups. So we can also work with the groups to determine sort of which tools would be best for the needs of the group. And speaking of that, Jeff, for the working group, can some members attend meetings remotely if needed?
Yes, for sure. We, as we described earlier, the real magic of the working group process is the in-person collaboration. And so, there needs to be a certain amount of a critical mass of the working group members who are actually meeting here in person at NCEAS. But of course, we have all of our meeting rooms are designed to be able to support virtual collaborators and participation. And so, of course, there are circumstances when folks can't travel and they still want to participate, and that's great. We want to encourage that as much as reasonable. So yes, definitely.
Yeah, and I think we should highlight here too. I don't know how many people are familiar with NCEAS, but NCEAS, we did relocate over COVID. So we are actually about 3 blocks away from our old building in a brand new facility that we got to design the layout for. So we kind of took our 25 years of experience facilitating collaborative teams and our experience during COVID of having virtual interactions. And we have new conference rooms, new tech support, new IT here at the building. And we've just started welcoming working groups back over the last couple months. And many of those working groups have been hybrid. So there have been people in person and people virtually, and it has been working really well. And we're really excited to have groups back here and also be able to sort of offer that opportunity to have hybrid work models. Okay, so this one's about the teams. We've identified one or more, or this group has identified one or more PIs within the team and a technical liaison and a communications liaison, but they would like a facilitator. Could that be someone Morpho provides?
Yes, we can work with you to find your facilitator. We have a great relationship with a facilitator who's local here to Santa Barbara that is often able to support NCEAS working groups, and hopefully we'll be able to support a lot of Morpho working groups as well. So we can connect funded teams with that person, but we can also work with them to find other facilitator that might be more specifically targeted depending on what the needs of the working group are. So yeah, we'll work with each team closely on that idea.
Could one or a subset of the meetings happen at a location other than NCEAS if that location seemed relevant to the project? For example, a meeting space at a UC reserve.
Yeah, I mean, so I would encourage, if I think that's a fine idea that I encourage you to include in your proposal. We'll have to evaluate like the case. It'll be on a case-by-case basis when we want to go and allow for things like that. Again, we're trying to encourage all meetings to occur at NCEAS for good reason. We know that our process of doing so works well, but you're right. There may be certain situations when having a meeting at a different facility might make a lot of sense for the team, and we'll consider that. If the rationale is there. There's also a case in which a team may want to have, like, prior to the first full working group meeting, it may be really useful and effective for just the core team of PIs, and maybe, like in this case, the technical liaison to meet ahead and have just a core team meeting to plan for all the in-person working group meetings. And it may, if all the PIs are already in one location or near one another, but not near Santa Barbara, then it may make sense to have that core team meeting, closer to those folks. And so that could be considered, again, within your budget, an actual official working group meeting that is funded, and maybe that might not occur at NCEAS. So that's a case that we'll certainly consider with folks as they come up. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Jeff. Are there any restrictions on group composition in terms of whether people have worked together before?
Not really. I mean, certainly, we want to encourage, longstanding collaborations to continue and to consider Morpho as a good platform to continue those. And so we don't have strict limitations on that. That said, again, as Courtney mentioned earlier, we are evaluating the team composition for diversity. And so it's possible that, longstanding collaborations that are 10 individuals, if there's limited diversity in where those individuals are coming from, what sector they're in, and we start to have a lack of diversity of background, as well as just perspective and expertise in cases like that. And so we want to encourage strong diversity in all of those realms. And so, just keep that in mind when you're putting together your team.
Are subgroups encouraged or facilitated?
They can be. I think they might be referring to what I was talking about earlier, where we have kind of not full working group meetings, but maybe like sub-teams meeting independently of the full working group meeting in between those meetings. They can, if there's a good rationale for having a sub-team meet in person, and have that funded by Morpho, then I certainly encourage you to include that in your proposal and describe why that will be really beneficial.
And I would say there's also, as the working group moves through the 2 years, subgroups are kind of expected to meet informally and opportunistically as needed. So while these in-person, 3 to 5 day meetings are really important and really core to the process, there is the in-between where groups really should be sort of collaborating and making sure that they're checking in with each other. And these subgroups may be things that should be meeting throughout the entire course of the 2 years, and really kind of developing the science more in the in-between.
Right. Yeah. And in that case, yeah, sorry if I was unclear. So that should definitely, so meetings of sub-teams should definitely be occurring throughout the working group process, but typically those would be virtual. But there might be cases in which those sub-teams might want to meet in person too. So, we can consider funding those sub-team meetings happening in person here at NCEAS, when a rationale is provided. But, again, I think for the most part, those teams would be meeting virtually.
So I think we've gotten to most of the questions that have been asked so far. Are there any others that people really want to chime in with before we wrap up? I think this was a really nice set of questions, and you can always follow up with us via email if things occur to you after this. There is also an FAQ on our website. I don't know if we mentioned that, but there is an FAQ with the RFP information. So definitely look that over as well. There are a couple more questions popping in here. Is there a typical model for how recipients often fund the analysis work outside of group meetings? So, i.e. postdocs, graduate students, additional grants, etc.
Yeah, it's hard to say, given again that this is Morpho's first year, so we don't have at least Morpho working group track record to point to in this case. And so it'll be really, I think the answer to that will be really dependent on the working group and what their kind of existing collaborations or funding models might be, as far as kind of working with postdocs or others. So it's hard to provide more detail than that. I don't know, Courtney, if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, I think the magic of the working group is really being able to come together, and then also being able to provide a little bit of time in the interim to work together. And the model that we have used so far at NCEAS has been that these research processes should align with the work you're also doing in your own lab or your own day-to-day work. So a lot of times postdocs or graduate students or research analysts are excited by the working group model and can participate in that working group model and be funded to do that while they're here. And then that nicely aligns with the work they're already doing. So that's sort of how they provide time in the interim to be able to work on this. But we are not able to provide funding for postdocs or graduate students to participate in the in-between times. And then we have one more question about matching. So can we explain kind of the mechanism of matching, or what we have in mind for the matching process? And this person asks because if matching is mentioned in the proposal, then it may need to go through the university.
I see. Yeah. So we don't have any kind of hard and fast requirements as far as what information is provided for matching funds. I would say use your discretion to include whatever you think will be helpful for the review of your proposal. But yeah, that also may not require jumping through additional hoops if that would be burdensome. And so we can, depending on what is included in the description of matching funds, we can follow up with folks for more information or clarity. And so, that can be very conversational, including with our review team. So I hope that's helpful.
And maybe one last question for the data sources. Should these be identified in the proposal mostly? Or is this something that the working group, once convened, can tackle more concretely or extensively together?
It's definitely something that the working group can plan to tackle concretely once in person. That said, you'll see within the proposal, there is linked a data sources table that we hope will, at least be partially filled out with some ideas of existing data sets that could be applied for the project. So the answer is kind of a mix. We would like to see some examples of what you're thinking as far as what sort of data sources would be brought to bear, and what analyses might be able to be applied to those, with the understanding that additional sources may be identified by the team once it's convening. So yeah.
Yeah, we want to be able to know that you can ask and answer questions that you're interested in from the get-go, and there's data available, but it doesn't have to be every single data set you plan to use.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think that's it.
Great.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody.
We're just right under the hour. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. This has been really great, and such a lot of really great questions. I'm glad that you all have been able to ask these. Hopefully the answers given were adequate for you. We'll be posting the video of this to YouTube soon, and we'll post a link to that video on the Morpho webpage, which you can access or share with your network and other members of your potential working group soon. So thank you for your participation. I don't know, Courtney, anything else you want to say in closure?
just, we really appreciate you all being here. We look forward to reviewing these applications and these proposals, and we're really looking forward to launching this process with you all. So thanks so much. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney, and thanks everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.